What's up, guys? Welcome to WOYS Live Hour. It's the Wolf of Young Street live. It's been a crazy week, you guys. Such a crazy week. For has to be the. I want to talk about the Blue Jays first this week. Has to be the biggest bottle job ever, ever, ever. The Blue Jays got my hopes up there. They got my hopes up, and I was right there with you guys. Even if I'm not a big baseball fan myself, I was right there with you guys. I was really hoping that the Blue Jays could bring it home, but it has to be the biggest bottle job ever. How are you 3-2 up? Away, you take a 3-2 lead coming back from LA, and then you proceed to blow a 3-2 lead, lose two games on the trot at home. Come on, come on. Yeah, it's just like our Canadian teams too, to break our hearts like that. The Edmonton Oilers have been blue balling us the last 3 seasons. It was very frustrating for me to see the Blue Jays lose like that. But you guys get in the comments today. Let me know how you're feeling about that loss by the Toronto Blue Jays. Even if you're not a baseball fan, obviously as Canadians we root. We don't have so many teams playing these competitions, right? That's our those are our teams, right? Any Canadian team that makes the pinnacle of sports like that, you want to see them do well. So you guys get in the comments. Let me know, how did you feel about the Blue Jays losing yesterday? How did that make you feel? Trust me, I was going through all the emotions there because the moment when I saw they were 3-0 up, I was like, "Let's go! Maybe it's finally gonna happen." And then they proceed to blow a 3-0 lead, and then as soon as they brought the LA Dodgers brought in Yamamoto, it was like it was a wrap. Anyways, is what it is. Is what it is. The other bit of news we got this week was that, well, it seems that we're not in a recession after all. Apparently, it turns out that the third quarter is going to come out in the positive territory. So if you guys don't know what a recession means, it's basically technically two consecutive quarters of GDP decline, and it looks like the third quarter, while we did decline, Canada declined in the second quarter. There looks like the third quarter we're gonna see a slight increase. So technically, we've avoided a recession, but trust me, you're not. Yeah, in the streets though, it feels so much worse in the streets. Like, tell me it doesn't feel like we're in a recession right now. I mean, how's a recession supposed to feel when you think about it? Lots of job losses, money doesn't go quite as far, all those things that we're feeling right now. So it's hard for me to believe any government telling me that we're not in a recession right now. Yeah, anyways, you guys get in the comments, let me know. I want to know who's watching today. You guys let me know how you're feeling right now. Do you feel like how do you feel about the Blue Jays blowing? Braveheart says a sad, touching story. Jeez, are you not a baseball fan? You're not a baseball fan? Anyways, so what do I have for you guys today? Obviously, I've got more than just talking Blue Jays and talking sports for you guys today. First thing I want to talk to you guys about today. So apparently, I was right. You remember last time when we were talking about the whole Reagan ad and how Ontario proceeded to and I think it was Lady Genuine that asked that question at the last week, and she was like, "Well, did McCartney know that Doug Ford was going to put out that Ronald Reagan ad, and did McCartney give the approval on that?" And sometime during the week, shit hit the fan because Doug Ford came out and was like, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, Marconi knew I was going to put out that ad," and I was like, "Ooh, he's just he he's just throwing a grenade in the works there." Because at the time I said if Marconi knew that ad was going out and he let it go out, then we are in a lot of shit because you got to know exactly what Trump is going to do with such an ad. You got to know. I mean, it's not rocket science to imagine what Donald Trump will do when you try and undermine him in front of his base like that. And it seemed like a very like it would have been a stupid decision for the Connie team to be like, okay, go ahead, it's fine. But Doug Ford came out during the week and said, well, as a matter of fact, they saw the ad. And in my mind, I was like, well, that makes no sense. And thankfully, yesterday we got a little bit of an explanation. McCartney came out and said, well, he saw the ad, but he never approved the ad. Clearly, I'm just paraphrasing what he actually said there. But he said he saw the ad, but he didn't approve the ad going out. But for me, that creates a bigger problem because that means that and that this is my problem with the Canadian system and with our system here in general because it's like how is it possible that the prime minister tells a premier, dude, don't do that. It's gonna ruin the negotiations with the United States. And the premier proceeds to ignore the prime minister, which seems like what happened here. It seems like Doug Ford, despite the fact that particular ad was shown to McCartney's team as it appears, it would seem that Doug Ford chose to ignore warnings by McCartney and proceeded to put out that ad. And I told you guys last week that I don't think McCartney would have approved that ad. And thankfully, it's coming out now that he didn't approve that ad, despite what the way Doug Ford, despite what Doug Ford said. It sounds like he didn't approve the ad. So how you guys feel about this? Hey, Northern Numbers, my man. Northern Numbers says here in Abbotsford, stoking the algorithm. What are you doing to stoke the algorithm, my guy? What are you doing? What are you doing today? So, in case some of you missed what I said earlier, felicitations to all of you Blue Jays fans. Yeah, I was right there with you yesterday, feeling all the hurt and all the pain, because it was like I cannot believe that the Toronto Blue Jays blew that lead, 3-2, going into coming back home to Toronto, and then they proceed to blow a three a 3-0 lead in Game 7. I could not believe my eyes. Also, the other thing I asked earlier, if you missed that, was does it feel like we're in a recession? Because technically, according to all the numbers that we've seen this week, we're not actually in a recession. But how does it feel? How does it feel on the ground? I know for me, like things like I I've seen a lot of companies around where I am that a lot of companies laying off people. I know going into obviously to the grocery store that shit ain't sweet. But anyways, so we can start. That's the note I want to start on. Connie seems to have confirmed that he did not approve the ad that Doug Ford decided to put out. Okay, so that is what it is. But I want to talk about something else that is new today. There's something new today. You guys, did you see that the Supreme Court just struck down mandatory minimums for possession of child pornography? Just a warning, by the way. If we start talking about this and this is something that's sensitive for you, I apologize ahead. But, anyways, the Supreme Court just struck down mandatory minimums of 1 year in jail for possession of child pornography. And I want to know how you guys feel about this because we know that this initial mandatory minimum was actually put in place in the mid 2000s during the Harper administration. We know Pierre Poilievre is very much in favor of mandatory minimums, as much as a lot of the conservative people tend to be in favor of mandatory minimums. And Pierre Poilievre has come out and said that he would use the notwithstanding clause. I'll explain what the notwithstanding clause is. But Pierre Poilievre has come out and said that he would use the notwithstanding clause to ensure that the mandatory minimums for possession of child pornography stays in place. Now, the reason the Supreme Court has struck this down is because they say that imposing mandatory minimums goes against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which protects against cruel and unusual punishment. Okay? And the idea being that this law of mandatory minimums might be applied to people who are not who do not necessarily deserve such punishments. So I want to know, before we get talking, before we get deep into this, how do you guys feel about this? How do you feel about how do you feel about having mandatory minimums in place as a deterrent for possession of child pornography? You guys get in the comments right now. Let me know how what you're thinking. How are you feeling about this? Get in the comments. I want to have a really lively conversation with you guys today. So you guys help me out. Get in the comments. How do you feel about mandatory minimums for possession of child pornography? Okay. So, you guys say, who's there with me? Who's there with me? Get in the comments. Talk to me, guys. Talk to me, guys. Talk to me. Okay, I'm just making sure I get your comments here. Okay, Northern Numbers. Are you a baseball fan? I gotta ask. I gotta ask that question though. I want to know the level of heartbreak you guys are you guys are feeling in the chat today, because oh, what a night it was yesterday. What a night. I wasn't feeling that at all. So another number says mandatory minimum is necessary. It should be up to 2 years. Okay, okay, okay. Uh, oh, R says mandatory minimums is necessary. It should be up to 2 years. Um, oh, another numbers is a soccer person like me. Great, great. Soccer is the best sport, my guy. Soccer is the best sport. I don't know why. I don't know why people watch anything else. You can't watch anything else. Okay, so R says mandatory minimums are necessary and should be up to 2 years. Okay, so I gotta ask though. Um, and I'll give you a scenario here. Let me paint you a scenario, yeah? So imagine a 70-year-old girl is dating an 18-year-old boy, right? And they maybe they do what a lot of young people do, and they exchange explicit images between one another. The problem with the mandatory minimum is that if that kid were to be caught with those explicit images of that 17-year-old girl, he would go to prison. He would be the court would be required to hand him the mandatory minimum by the letter of the law, right? And this decision by the Supreme Court is meant to prevent those kinds of punishments for being handed down when it is not necessarily merited. So I want to know, you're saying it should be 2 years. So I want to know what you're thinking here. How would you tackle that possibility that you might hand down a punishment that is maybe not necessarily merited? Okay, R says, I say 2 years minimum because it ensures that even if you have money to buy the best legal team, you still serve minimum for stupidity. Whoa. Ooh la la. I don't know though. I don't know about how is that. I mean, people do stuff while they're I mean, they're young people, right? I just told you 17, 18. They're young people in maybe in love in that particular moment. And they do stuff that they think, is 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 is, is valid, and all of that. It shows the feelings they have for one another. You're saying that that's not stupidity. That's you were young at some point, and maybe you're young right now. I don't even know how old you are. Anyways, R says, in your scenario, which is my 18-year-old and 17-year-old girlfriend scenario, uh, in your scenario, an 18-year-old should know there is a risk to dating a 17-year-old. The law is clear. Ignorance is bliss. Jeez. No, 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 no. Okay, so for those of you who are just joining, obviously I just said that the Supreme Court just struck down the mandatory minimums for possession of child pornography. And Pierre Poilievre has come out and criticized that move and said he would use the notwithstanding clause to ensure that the mandatory minimums stay in place. If you don't know what the mandate, if you don't know what of what the notwithstanding clause is, it is basically a provision that allows for your charter, some sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to be suspended, to be overridden for a period of about for a period of about 5 years. And essentially, so the government or whoever is basically the government that's trying to apply this law gets to override some sections of your charter rights when the notwithstanding clause is invoked, right? And so Pierre Poilievre would invoke the notwithstanding clause in order to ensure that the mandatory minimum stay in place. And R says everything has a risk. 18-year-olds, an 18-year-old isn't young. That is an adult. I can tell you're pretty like far in the direction of like you're very much for. You seem to be very much in favor of harsh punishment. But in my opinion, I think that is disproportionate punishment for that 18-year-old. Like, I mean, he's dating someone that he's legally allowed to date, right? Or it could be also the flip side, right? It could be a 17-year-old boy. Okay, let's be gender positive here. Let's be let's allow the equality under the law, I guess. But I mean, I bring this up because, and I feel like maybe we'll not agree on this, but I think that the striking down the mandatory minimums, I think the extreme side of it is that people think that, oh, that means that, okay, I'll get back to your comment there, R. A lot of people think that because the mandatory minimums has been removed, that means that people possessing child pornography are just going to be walking out of jail. Well, that's not necessarily what it means. It just means that the courts now have discretion to actually apply the proportionate sentence to a particular case. So they have to consider the factors around the case before a decision is made, as against just like a one size fits all rubber stamped decision on every single issue, right? So in my opinion, that I kind of disagree with what you're saying there, but I bring this up, and this is maybe this is a good segue for me to talk about. I want to talk about the Alberta teacher strike a little bit, and and there seems to be a new trend in politics right now where it would seem that the government is intent on pushing laws and pushing the envelope to see how far in terms of how far they can test your rights essentially before there is significant pushback. And it's becoming a bit of a trend with some of the laws, even at the federal level, that are being put forward. And so this obviously this week we learned that the Alberta government used the notwithstanding clause, the clause I just described to you that allows the government to override some sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They used that to return teachers, the teachers that were previously on strike, that had refused the contract that was being put in front of them. Sorry, they had refused. They were on strike because they wanted higher pay. They were on strike because they wanted smaller class sizes, amongst a few other things, right? And they had refused the terms that were being offered by the government to that point. And so the government, instead of eventually finding figuring out something with them, the government used the notwithstanding clause to force the teachers back to work. And essentially, if a teacher does not go back to work having been held on the after the notwithstanding clause has been imposed, they could face a fine of up to $500 a day per teacher, right? And obviously, this overrides this again. The use of the notwithstanding clause here overrides the charter, the section on the right to form groups, organized groups, and unions, and that section of the charter, right? So that's been overridden here using the notwithstanding clause, right? And obviously, you guys will know that Quebec is doing similar things where they're imposing using they're proposing to use the notwithstanding clause to impose well, essentially what they're saying is that government people working with the government or in the government should not be allowed to wear religious symbols. So I guess your hijab would fall under that kind of thing, maybe a turban. Um, but they're saying that they want to use the notwithstanding clause to basically impose secularism in that way, where you wouldn't be allowed to wear your religious symbols um, um, under this law, right? And they want to use the notwithstanding clause again to override your rights to expression, essentially, in Quebec. And we've seen the same thing with the federal government. The federal government recently they've passed. I mean, Bill C5, for example, um, might infringe on certain indigenous land rights, and and so my point here is that we're seeing a trend of laws being passed that have a tendency to kind of push that line of where the charter is supposed to protect you, and and how far it's we're in the realm of government overreach is my point here. So I want to know how you guys feel about these new laws that are coming down. um how do you feel about the Alberta government using the notwithstanding clause to send teachers back to work when they haven't addressed the fundamental needs of those teachers? You guys get in the comments. Let me know how you feel about this. Let me know how you feel. You guys let me know how you feel about this. But on the mandatory minimums, this is turning into a trend now. This they obviously we just talked about the 1 year mandatory minimum for child pornography being struck down. But there are a whole bunch of Stephen Harper era mandatory minimums that have been struck down recently by the Supreme Courts in recent cases. And I'll read you some of these. There was a mandatory minimum of 3 years for possession of prohibited or restricted firearm with ammunition. And that particular mandatory minimum was struck down in 2015. It was struck down as unconstitutional, right? Discharging a firearm with intent, that carried a mandatory minimum of 4 years, I think it was, and that was struck down in 2023 by the Supreme Court. So okay, yeah, here's another one that's interesting. Growing 6 marijuana plants for trafficking carried used to carry a mandatory minimum of 6 months, and now it has been repealed because cannabis is legalized and has been legalized since 2018. So this whole idea of the Supreme Court striking down the mandatory minimums is a bit of a trend now. It's a trend. It's a trend that we're seeing quite a bit of, and it is worrying in the sense that a lot of the laws that the position that the conservative government or a would-be conservative government under Pierre Poilievre would take is very similar to what a Stephen Harper government took, in terms of they are very much in favor of harsh punishment. They're very much in favor of things like mandatory minimums. And now we're seeing all these years later that all those minimums are being overridden as being unconstitutional. So Anyways, you guys let me know. Get in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts. I'm pretty curious how you guys feel about the government being able to basically override basically override the Supreme Court using the notwithstanding clause, but also override certain rights that you may you have in this obviously in this case of the teachers, their right to form unions and to do the things that unions do, demand their rights, right? Or in the case of Quebec, their rights to wear their to expression, to wear their religious symbols. How do you feel about governments having the power to take away your rights? Is it in the case of okay, so Braveheart says, I feel like these mandatory minimums that you read out are all necessary, maybe apart from legalized marijuana. The Supreme Court is sweet on crime. Is the Supreme Court sweet on crime though? I'm that makes me it makes me that's a very interesting point, right? Is the Supreme Court sweet on crime? Would you, do you feel like the Supreme Court is is upholding well, here's the thing, right? The Supreme Court's job is to interpret the law essentially, right? Their job is to say, okay, is it their job is to go, okay, you've imposed these mandatory minimums. Is it consistent with what the Charter of Rights and Freedoms allows, right? And and so whether you say it's sweet on crime or not, this is their job to interpret the law. Okay, so Braveheart says intentional discharge of a firearm mandatory minimum is not even harsh. Possession possession of illegal arms mandatory minimum isn't harsh. Okay, you're saying that some of the mandatory minimums I read you earlier are not harsh at all. Um, and you're saying who protects the everyday law abiding citizen? Thank you, Braveheart, for that comment. And that is the fundamental problem facing the federal government right now. They have to balance public safety with with also like preservation of your rights, right? And that is a difficult balance. That is a difficult balance. But is it as simple as the government's going, okay, we're going to impose and also, what I want to know from you is, do you think that these minimums will help as a deterrent to prevent people from committing crimes? Do you think if a person knows that, hey, if I get caught, I might go to jail for 1 year or whatever? Do you think that does that work in terms of does that really deter people who are determined to commit crimes? I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on that. You guys get in the comments, let me know. Obviously, right now the government is very okay. So let me get obviously right now the government is very focused on combating crimes. There have been a raft of laws focused on combating crime. The liberal government obviously put out some bill reform proposals, and we'll see how far that goes in the as it gets through the House of Commons there. But there's also the Borders Act that that was also put forward by the Liberals, and in that one, in the Borders Act, the government is seeking the power to be able to cancel visas at whatever stage if it is in the public interest, right? Anyways, Braveheart says canceling this mandatory minimums ensures that a bleeding heart judge can release a criminal, especially in this age of mental health. Hmm. Well, the idea is not to be able to release criminals. Ideally, people, based on the facts of the case, a criminal will still face the charges that they deserve and still get the time that is proportionate to their crime. That is not what the striking down of the mandatory minimum is meant to that's not what it's not meant to say that people don't serve time, right? Now, is it possible that the discretion of a certain of judges, that at the discretion of a certain judge, a criminal might go free if they have a good lawyer? Well, yeah, it is. It is if we're being truthful. Um, but again, if sometimes it's almost like, do you eat that? Do you eat that possible consequence, or do you just apply a mandatory minimum, which you know may not necessarily be lawful, but may not be constitutional. So Adoy Fashion says mandatory minimums can give law-abiding public some measure of confidence in the judiciary system. That is a good point. That is a good point because I, that's a good point because I could sit there and be like, you know what? If you're caught committing a crime, I know you're going to jail, right? Um, and 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 that is one facet of it. That is one facet of it. However, that is not the practical way our child rights and freedoms works. Um, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that is not how that is not how our child rights and freedoms works. But I wanna move on actually. Um, I want to talk about something that something that came across my table recently. The in BC is where I live, by the way. Hi, if you're in BC, hello to you guys. But the court, there was a case in the courts where the one of the First Nations got awarded a piece of land, or a bit of land, about, I think it was 5 kilometers square or something of land in a certain part of the province. And there is now this concern among certain people that have we gone too far with reconciliation, with truth, and with reconciliation with indigenous peoples, to the extent that, well, there's a worry with this new the precedence that is being set with this case. And I'll tell you what's going on here, right? So a certain First Nation, the Cowichan tribes, I want to say, they they brought a case in front of the courts about how their title should supersede any any property rights, essentially, on a certain piece of land, and they essentially won the rights. and and the fear going forward is that the precedent being set here is that tribes can proceed to challenge property rights in basically any part of the province or any part of the country. In fact, at the extreme, there's a bit of news that there are tribes from the U.S., from the United States, trying to challenge for land title rights in Canada, which is crazy, which is freaking crazy. And so, I where I want to know where how you guys feel about this, because obviously for those people in Richmond, which is where this particular case happened, in Richmond, British Columbia, it is a very nerve-wracking situation. Those people that own those properties are sitting there, go, well, they're having trouble, for example, renewing their mortgage, because, well, how is a bank going to renew your mortgage knowing that there's a possibility you might lose your property? That's not a good business decision. And they might have trouble with the value of their property might drop, because people, well, who's going to buy a property when they don't know if you are actually the legal owner of that property, right? And so that is a problem that the British Columbia government is actually trying to fight back on right now. They're trying to see if that particular award by the courts can be overturned. But how do you guys feel about this? And this marks actually the first time, if my memory serves, the first time that this is the first time um, that indigenous title has been upheld in urban areas. Typically, these things happen, but in like remote areas where maybe not as many people care. But now this is probably the first time it's taking place in an urban area, and people are going, well, what happens if a tribe comes and goes, well, Vancouver belongs to us, right? What happens to all those people that own the properties in Vancouver? Like, and so there's all that worry being built up there. But I want to know, how do you feel about the okay? So R says reconciliation has gone too far. It needs to be reevaluated and settled once and for all. No future land stuff again. Okay, so you tell me, how would you how would you end reconciliation? I'm curious about that because there are many people that share your perspective there that say, well, after where is the limit? After how many generations? After how much restitution have you done enough reconciliation? Okay, there are many people that have that process. So what you say that reconciliation at some point reconciliation should be settled once and for all. How would you do that? How at what point, what do you think is what should have happened, or what has happened so far that makes you think, you know what, this is enough done? The indigenous peoples should be happy with this much reconciliation. They shouldn't be asking for more. I'm curious about you guys' thoughts on that. You guys get in the comments, let me know. Yeah. So it is as I said, it is a dangerous precedent where the right the court has awarded this piece of land. Like, there's really, although the First Nations are saying, well, our intention is not to go after people's property. However, however, or they say that now. What happens when there's a change of leadership? What happens when in the future stuff changes, right? And now there is that precedent that they can be awarded land based if they claim title rights on that particular land. They can be awarded rights even if even if that property has been sold off, is now currently in the hands of a person who paid money for that property. They can be awarded the rights to that, right? Okay, so R says, I'm not an expert, but I know reconciliation is part of the division in Canada. We keep acknowledging land and ensuring the guilt is alive and free in the mind of all. That will never allow one Canada. Interesting, 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 interesting. Well, some people might argue the opposite though. That reconciliation is a way for eventually for indigenous peoples to feel a part of that they've been well, it's reconciliation essentially, right? By definition, it's meant to bring people together, right? That's what it is, right? But you're saying that this whole it, it actually divides Canada. That's an interesting point. Braveheart says the fact is that we can't even discuss the topic truthfully. You have to always support the indigenous. There is, I'm not gonna lie, there is that bias there is that bias in the media where people are not necessarily how should I say, people are not necessarily they're not necessarily balanced or upfront with the or and I'll give you an example, right? Let's okay, so Braveheart says there is risk discussing this. Jobs might be in jeopardy if you truthfully say what you mean. That is very interesting. That is very interesting. And yeah, as I said, there is that bias in the media, um, and that does sometimes prevent the, the problem. Though I find is that, I mean, there are some spaces where people discuss this maybe from the other side. So I'll give you an example, right? there at some point, maybe 5 years ago, I don't remember how many years ago now, there was a report of a mass grave in Kamloops, I want to say, and there was a lot of discussion about the impact of residential schools and the children that might have died in that particular spot in Kamloops. And as of today, as of today, while some ground disturbance has been found in that area, there from I'll get back to your comments, Braveheart. As of today, despite the fact that there was like some form of, like, I don't know, maybe radar or something was done and that showed that there was some sort of disturbance in that area. There has been no further like excavation or something to actually prove that there were actually bodies buried there, right? And there are several controversies around like residential schools that are talked about in on right wing media, but also obviously in the mainstream media, people try to be what should I say, empathetic to what the survivors of residential schools actually went through, and some of the repercussions that there have been from that have been perpetuated from generation to generation. But obviously, we live a bit in a world of, how should I say, populism, in a sense that as humans we try and follow the there is a risk, as you rightly said, Braveheart, that we pursue a line of like virtue signaling in our relationship with indigenous people, a line of hypocrisy that doesn't necessarily give room for open discussion, right? That is a fair point to make. Braveheart says, when you offend someone, you say sorry, you pay reconciliation for what you did, you repent and compensate. Does that mean that forever your generation should keep saying sorry? That is a good question, and that is why I want to ask, and this is a big question for me. After, for how long is the whole for how long should reconciliation, or the concept of at the very least um, monetary reconciliation, and well, economic reconciliation, and also the whole, as you say, land acknowledgement or some of those things, for how long does that continue? How long should that continue? At what point is it virtue? Is it just like performative, right? That's a good question to ask. I don't know. R says that Kamloops stuff was hilarious, even with the discovered. Yeah, it hasn't been proven to be a lie. Okay, uh, I'm going to read your comment as you've typed it, but it has not been proven to be a lie. The only thing is, it has not been proven beyond the doubts to be a mass grave. That is true. Okay. Um, that so I'll read your comments the way you've written it. R says that Kamloops stuff was hilarious, and even with the discovered lies or controversies, we can't speak the truth. It's just covered up and forgotten. Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, we've got 15 minutes to go, and so here's what I want to. This part is the free form. You guys can pop any topic you want to talk about, but next week is, well, obviously on November 4th, the budget is going to be released. We're getting McCartney's first budget, and there's a lot of trepidation out there that it for the on the liberal side that it may not pass. Although they've got the brave face on, they say, if this ends up being something we have to fight an election on, we don't care. We're willing to go to an election. And I want to know, how you guys feel about that. Are you ready for an election? Do you want an election right now? And if an election does go by, I think I think that the liberals should fight with everything they've got not to go to an election. That is just my opinion. That is my advice, because I think if the liberals go to an election right now, there is a very good chance that they lose the position that they are in right now. Maybe they'll still. I don't know. I think we go to an election, they might still win a minority, but I think they'll lose some seats. That's what I think. Because the only thing maybe preserving the possibility of them still winning here is that Polyev has not improved his standing, right? He has not improved his standing. And because he has not improved his standing, he has not improved his likability. If we go to an election, I expect, to be fair, that McCartney is going to win another minority government. That is my prediction. But so, in that sense, that's why I do not want an election, right? But it would seem that the conservatives are already in campaign mode. You already see some of the speeches that Pierre Poilievre has been putting out. I've been focused a lot more on it's almost campaign style type of like speeches he's giving, which is kind of interesting. But I think this budget is going to pass. I think it's going to pass. I think, if anything, the NDP and maybe what's her name? The Green Party leader. Is her name Elizabeth May? I forget. Elizabeth May, I think. I think Elizabeth May might support the budget because, I mean, why not? And then obviously the Liberals will need two more. So, but how do you guys feel about this budget coming up? I'm predicting that we're gonna get. Obviously I've said this already. We're probably gonna have a deficit around 82 billion dollars. Is it 82 billion? Yeah, 82 billion dollars. I think was the number. I think that would be that's around where the deficit is going to land. Okay, so Braveheart says PP also said McCartney should focus on an affordable budget and not trigger an election. Well, the problem with PP saying that, with Pierre Poilievre saying that, is, well, what is an affordable budget? Well, an affordable budget, according to Pierre Poilievre, is that it's essentially that the McCartney should not exceed what uh, what Justin Trudeau promised would be the deficit when he left office, which was 47. Uh, I always get my billions and millions mixed together because when you start talking about big numbers like that, it's just like, come on, I don't even. Let me just confirm before I say if I've been saying billion all this time, but the numbers the numbers always like the numbers always get so confusing. But let me just make sure, verify that I'm saying the right number there. Was it? Oh yeah, it is 47 billion. Okay. Yeah. So, an affordable budget for an affordable life, according to Pierre Poilievre, is that it's essentially that McCartney should not exceed $47 billion in deficit. We know that is not going to happen. So, and I mean, for the most part, we know historically that the opposition party doesn't support the budget, right? So I don't expect that they're going to support the budget again, irrespective of whatever McCartney does. I do not expect. I wasn't expecting that it would be the conservatives to support the budget. It it's just it doesn't historically happen that the official opposition is sitting there supporting the budget. So forget about the conservatives supporting the budget. It's just not going to happen. Now the bloc, I've tabled demands that I don't think that the liberals are willing to meet, right? Because I wouldn't meet that. I think that the bloc's demands are absolutely they are absolutely gaga. The 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 bloc's demands are absolutely wild, right? They're asking for an austerity budget while also asking for more money. Like the block is the block is a joke. The block is a joke. So I do not expect that the liberals will try and make a deal with the bloc, and I do not expect. I don't know what the bloc is going to do, and if obviously if they stick to what they've said, they're not going to vote for the budget. That's why I think it falls to the NDP. The NDP has been put in a position where they are the ones with the power in their hands to either trigger an election or keep this government in power. And I think the NDP is not asking for anything that serious. The NDP is asking that the government does the significant job of supporting the people right now, especially through this is a very difficult period for people. As I said, it feels like we're in a recession, even if the numbers don't say we're in a recession right now. It feels like we're in a recession. All the signals that people feel in their pockets right now say we're in a recession. Even if the numbers, that's two consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, the numbers the numbers are not there yet. We expect that the third quarter will not be negative, and so we wouldn't have had we would not have met the criteria for a recession. That's just a fact, right? So the NDP is asking that the government supports people through this difficult time, and I don't imagine that would be too difficult for the liberals to be able to manage. I think that is pretty achievable. They're saying they don't want to see an austerity budget, and I'm sitting there looking at what, as I said, in my mind looks like it's going to be about $82 billion in the deficit, and I'm like, okay, like that's not an austerity budget. That's not an austerity budget at all. So I think it will be easy enough for the liberals to give the NDP what they want to see. I don't know how do you guys feel about this though? How do you feel about this? Do you think that the NDP of all people is going to be like, you know what, let's go to an election? Because we know the conservatives and the bloc, or we believe the conservatives and the bloc do not want to vote for this budget. Actually, I got one more thing I want to talk to you guys before we get out of here. Braveheart says, sitting down and waiting for the budget saga, though. That will be fun. We will be covering that. Okay, okay. So, you know what? I might do, depending on how dramatic that day is, if it turns out we are going to an election, you better believe I will be live. If it turns out I'm right about the deficit amounts, maybe I'll come live as well and gloat about how right I am about a lot of these things because, I'm good at this. Anyways, um, um, but if it turns out to be anything dramatic, like maybe we find ourselves going to an election, well, I'll trust me. I'll be here. I'll be here. So that's a good shot, Braveheart. A good call there. I might be live on that on the in the evening of November 4th when I come back from work. But there is one thing I wanted to talk about. Speaking of bad news and bad economic problems, apparently India is putting new tariffs on Canada right now. India is putting tariffs on Canada's. One sec. I wanna check what number the tariff was there. I think it was it was 25%. I want to say, but I need to check that. It was 25% on chickpeas on oh yeah, it was 30%. India put 30% tariffs on yellow peas. Um, Obviously, when you hear this news talked about, they're gonna obviously the conservatives are gonna say the India has just put tariffs on Canada. The truth is, India has just put tariffs on any country trying to sell yellow peas to India. So it's actually a worldwide tariff. The reason why it would look like it is just Canada is because Canada supplies the bulk of the yellow peas, right? That's a big. I think it's Saskatchewan that deals with that, right? That's a big product for Canada. That's why it would have an outsized effect on Canada because we supply the bulk of that, right? But also the other thing to pay attention to when you hear about this tariff is, and I mean, it is fair for the conservatives to try. I mean, the conservatives, it is their job to try to take advantage of this. And they will tell you that these tariffs are completely out of the blue. They're new. It's because Makani has been negotiating terribly. The truth really is that India has had these tariffs on yellow peas off and on since 2017. Essentially, they've they, they've had these tariffs on since 2017, and I'll give you the history. Before 2017, India was India was a major buyer of Canadian peas, right? And often with very low or zero tariffs. And this was meant for them to meet their domestic demand for yellow peas. They're a big importer of peas from Canada, right? But between 2017 and 2019, India imposed 50% tariffs on yellow peas to protect their farmers during times of surplus, right? Okay, so you're getting you're getting the trend here, right? Between 2017 and 2019, they imposed 50% tariffs because they had a surplus, right? Then between 2020 and 2023, the tariffs were kind of up and down. Sometimes they were suspended when, but but by and large, sometime between sometime between 2024 and 2025, they allowed duty-free imports for yellow peas in order to ease high food prices, to ease inflation. So what you're hearing, what you're going to see here is that India does this thing where they apply tariffs when they have a surplus, and they remove tariffs when they need to fight inflation and to feed their big population, right? They, in order to keep food prices low for their people, they will drop tariffs um, when 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 they when they are facing high prices, because obviously more supply means lower prices, right? But when they have a surplus, in order to protect their own farmers, they will increase tariffs. So this really is nothing to do with Marconi's negotiation skills. So be careful when the spin machine of the when when the spin machine of the conservatives start to spin these tariffs. Okay, you guys know I call out the bullshit on both sides. That's just what it is, right? Um, so so that brings me to the end of our live show today. You guys let me know in the comments, how do you feel about all the things we talked about today? Give me your opinions in the comment section. Obviously, I read all your comments even after the show is done, even after the live show is done. Always put your comments in the comment section. And if you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe down below, and give the video a like, and join me anytime I'm live. Okay, and bring your topics if you have something you would rather be talking about. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.